I've been on a bit of an AU expanding kind of kick lately, so I figured why not make a little mini-series sort of thing, where I just share little bits of my AU's lore and all that stuff. This series will be semi-scripted, so I do apologize in advance if I end up stuttering or stumbling my words.
So here we go.
Number 1. After the reopening of the Archdale Tramway in 1970, a tram engine from the US will be imported to Sodor to help continuing construction on the tramway. This continuation will become a tourist line that would run through various towns and alongside rivers and lakes. Flora will be the engine brought over after being purchased from a museum in 1969. And Flora will become the runner of this tourist line upon its opening in 1973. Number 2. Bertie was built in 1926 by the newly established Sodor Bus Company located near Lower Tidmouth. Thomas will end up racing him to Upside's branch line that same year. The SBC will build many different unique buses for the routes, Bulger being one of these to have entered service in 1958. And the SBC will be acquired by the Northwestern Railway in 1979 to avoid all the buses being scrapped. Yeah. Number 3. Sir Stephen Topham Hatt was the one to pull off the whole birthday party trek as seen in Season 5 in 1974. What a Chad. Number 4. Sir Charles Topham Hatt was a locomotive designer in his younger days, and he even spent many years of his life in America designing engines for the Big City Railroad. After his death in 1985, a memorial plaque was placed at the entrance of the railroad's main engine works in his honor. Pretty cool. Number 5. The events of It's Good to Be Corden, that one shitty Hit Era episode, actually takes place in 1925 in my AU. So that way it can be after Henry was let out of the tunnel and before its rebuild in 1935. This will effectively make his use of West Cole in that episode way more logical. Number 6. So you know that one mid-episode Percy in a Carnival that was on every single Hit Era fan's Thomas DVDs when they were a toddler, right? On this AU, it would not be Percy to fuck up coal deliveries, it will be Paxton to do so in 1969. It would make more sense for a diesel to understand the value of coal at first, and I like to think Paxton was built at the end of the BR-08's production dates in 1962. So it would make more sense that he only first met steam engines when he arrived on Sodor in 69, and therefore will not understand the value of coal at first. It ain't fuck up and all that, you know. Yeah. Number 7. In 1979, James was being a bit more cocky than usual, and so a very elaborate prank was pulled on him to where he was painted to a busy bee livery in his sleep. And to everyone's surprise, he actually found it funny when he woke up. He even kept the livery until 1984. Alright, this is episode 2 of my AU lore rambling series thing, so no one goes down, let's get into it. Number 1. When Oliver escaped to Sodor in 1967, British Railways' plan to ban steam traction came to full light. The Northwestern Railway, being mostly having steam engines in their fleet, sought to separate from BR to prevent them from being scrapped. And after a very lengthy legal battle and some heated protests, the Sodor Railway Preservation Act, or better known as Oliver's Act, was passed in 1968. The NWR was once again its own entity and officially preserved, and Manchester will become their final terminus on the mainland. But it was only a few months after the passing of the act that BR put its steam engine ban into full effect. Number 2. After getting the railway officially preserved, Sir Charles Topham Hatt sought out more sources of income to keep the railway afloat. In 1969, he struck up a deal with the Scarlilly Railway to build a mine that will be serviced by both railways. Boulder Quarry began construction in the same year, but after the boulder at the site became dislodged from its perch and wreaked absolute havoc on the site in 1970, the project was abandoned, and plans eventually shifted to building a wharf at Valesbridge, which would open in 1973. Number 3. Bertram is an 080 tank engine built by the Mid-Sodor Railway in the 1880s, around the same time as Duke, and it was built using a small England kit as a guide and eventually given the bunker and extra wheels to become a tank engine. He was mostly stationed at the mine that mined gold for shunting duties, and often saw the Farquhar engines as the mine was served by both railways. But when the Mid-Sodor Railway and associated mines closed in 1941, Bertram was left at the now abandoned mine. It wasn't until 1976, when Toby stumbled upon the mine with the Hatt family, that Bertram was restored along with the mine. The NWR and the SKR collaborated to restore the gold mine as a tourist exhibit, and Bertram became its main operator. Pretty happy ending. Number 4. The MSR closed in 1941 as it was heavily damaged during a bombing raid in World War II. Some other engines, notably Smudger, were unfortunately killed during this blitz. Although the trackbed interestingly remained relatively in good shape for many years until the Skarloey Railway bought up most of its land to expand in the 60s. Number 5. In 1937, the Northwestern Railway built the first of its new goods engine class, a 480 tender engine class. The first one being number 5809 Rampage, and she looked very similar to most LMS designs, but proved incredibly successful handling the goods work. A few more of the class were built, but building of the class ceased when World War II began in 1939. And as of 1973, 2 of the class are currently preserved, with 5809 being one of them. Number 6. Bell was built in 1950 as British Railways number 42069.
Nice.
And she became the banking engine at Wellsworth in 1965 after her service life ended on the mainland. In 1968, after the railway was preserved, she was repainted into a special indigo livery which would go to all the Northwestern Railway's banking engines. Pretty cool livery, I like it. I'd say it's about time we do a 3rd episode of this weird series that I like to call my AU lore ramblings. So here we go! Number 1. All characters that arrived on Sodor post-1948 wore either British Railways black or green, and they wore these liveries until being repainted when the railway was preserved in 1968. And when they were repainted, they were either given a new unique livery or the livery of the previous railway, but with Northwestern lettering instead. So for example, when Arthur was repainted, he was given LMS maroon, but instead of LMS lettering, he would get NWR lettering, and so on and so forth. Number 2. The Great Western Railway's main livery was a mint shaded green rather than the swamp marsh shaded green in real life. Duck, Oliver, and all the other Great Westerners on Sodor would sport this livery once again after being repainted in the 60s. Number 3. When Sodor was being eyed by the LMS for a buyout in the early 20s, the LNER, who was very much not wanting that to happen, sold the NWR 2 of their A1 class locomotives, one of which being Gordon, who was stationed at Knapford, and the other A1 was stationed at Sodor's then terminus, Vigorstown. This A1 was rather interesting as it was never really known which exact engine it was when it arrived, as there was no number visible or any of the records. So the Northwestern Railway simply numbered this engine as 27. Number 4. In 1934, locomotive number 27 was converted to burn oil instead of coal, and was fitted with an old American oil tender that was purchased from overseas. And was also given a larger buffer beam up front. This experiment did turn out relatively positive results, but they were rather minimal. But regardless, the Northwestern Railway wanted to save on coal costs at the time, so number 27 remained as an oil burner. Number 27 is preserved and still lives on Sodor present day. Where on Sodor, I will dive into in a separate video. Number 5. After Henry's infamous Flying Kipper crash in 1935, Sir Topham Hatt I knew that a rebuild was necessary to return Henry to service better than before. And so, who would he call upon other than his son, who lived in the United States at the time, for him to draw up new designs for Henry's rebuild based on similar engines he had designed for the Big City Railroad. Once the drawings were delivered to Sodor, Henry's overhaul commenced, and he returned to service as one of the strongest engines on the mainline in 1936. Number 6. After the Knapford and Olmsted Railway merged with the Arlesdale Tramway in 1913, a new expressway was created along the coastline of Sodor. And now the newly established Knapford, Arlesdale, and Olmsted Railway, better known as the KA&UR, purchased a D16 440 to run this new express service, this engine being Molly, who was repainted into a bright yellow livery, as the new owners of this engine wanted to show off that they had a then modern express engine on their fleet. They wanted to show off to everyone around them. Number 7. Emily was the last of the Stirling single class to be built in 1895 and was purchased by the Sodor and Mainland in 1905 to run their main line, which ran up to Kildan at the time. In 1948, she was repainted into British Railways blue and placed on the Peel Goddard branch line. See you guys in the next one. We're doing a 4th episode. Let's get it! Well, thank you guys for 1,000 views on the 3rd episode. Really appreciate it. Alright, I'll jump into episode 4. Number 1. Ryan was built on Sodor in 1976, based on the Great Northern Railway's N2 design. The main differences being a shorter wheelbase and reduced weight so it can operate on the coastal run, or Arthur's branch line. And during his test runs, Ryan fell off a nearby pier suffering a brake failure. He was eventually fished out, and Arthur, who just happened to be nearby, got a pretty good laugh out of it. And Ryan now works with Arthur on the Hard branch line, sporting a unique purple livery. Number 2. Hero was built in Japan in 1935 by the Japanese National Railway, and he was quickly shipped to the United States pretty much right off the bat. He bounced around several railroads and eventually ended up wearing several liveries up until 1955 when it was withdrawn from service and then placed on a siding awaiting the cutter's torch. He didn't sit around for long, thankfully, as he was quickly purchased by a railtoy company named Hiroshi Railtours. And Hero ended up being one of the first engines of the company and was repainted into one of the most vibrant liveries you could possibly see for an engine of his size. Hero worked for the company for several years and was one of the most popular engines of the entire fleet. Hero made really good friends with lots of engines in his ranks, and he enjoyed his time in the United States under this company. But the fun didn't last long, unfortunately, as in 1972, Hiroshi Railtours went bankrupt, and all of the engines were put on auction following this. But Hero once again cheated death as he was quickly purchased and shipped to Sodor. Where on Sodor, I will explore in another video. Number 3. Top Hat, yes, that Top Hat, was an 042 Camelback locomotive built in 1906 by the Big City Railroad. While being mostly a shunter engine, he was interestingly given mostly non-shunter services and often did some passenger work. This would mean that he would wear the Big City Railroad's yellow passenger livery, as he would do majority passenger work. That wasn't the only type of work he would do, as whenever was needed, he had to do garbage trains. Needless to say, he wasn't happy having to deal with everyone else's garbage, you know? Number 4. Bash, Dash, and Ferdinand all worked under the Big City Logging Railroad, which is a subsidiary of the BZRR. Bash and Dash were the first to be built in 1899 as twins, and Ferdinand would arrive in 1903, being an 040 Camelback. The liveries were rather interesting, yet each of them all wore slightly different variants of liveries from each other. Bash and Dash just having complete inverses of each other's liveries. Number 5. In this alternate universe, Stanley looks like this, and arrived on Sodor in 1970 to help with a major restoration and construction project in the heart of Sodor. What this project was, I will explore in another video. Number 6. In 1948, the 3 tram engines that were previously the runners of the Arlesdale Tramway since 1923 were relocated to other parts of Sodor and replaced with an NWR L1 tank engine. This L1 was fitted with a front cowcatcher and stationed at Arlesdale End, and for many years this L1 will be the only operator of this tramway. That was until 1965 when it was withdrawn from service and placed in a shed at Arlesdale End, and shortly after the line will close down the same year. This closure was pretty brief, as only a few years later, in 1968, the Northwestern Railway would separate from British Railway. When the news came out that they were saved, the L1's crew quickly flung the doors open and danced around him in joy, as they began firing him up for service once again. The L1 was still in operational condition, so it basically was right off the bat put into working service and had the tramway restored. To heavy fanfare, the Arlesdale Tramway would reopen, with the L1 as operator. See you guys in the next one. Welcome all to the 5th episode of this AU lore rambling series. Woo! This episode will be focusing on the rather spookier sides in celebration of Halloween, for this is a Halloween special. So without further ado, let's get into it. Number 1. One of the Worldsworth and Suttery's engines, number 4, Billy Derbyton to be exact, was rebuilt with larger buffers in 1927 following an accident. Shortly after, he was sold into industrial use at the China Clay Pits near Brandon, and was thus repainted to a pale gray livery. Billy was one of the earliest engines at the Clay Pits and will be later joined by Bill and Ben. By 1938, he was the last engine from the long-gone Worldsworth and Sudbury Railway. In 1949, an avalanche occurred, and Billy was killed in the events that ensued, unfortunately, and he was scrapped shortly after. The last of the Worldsworth and Sudbury was gone. We fast forward to around 1969 or so, when Bill was finishing up his shifts for the night, where he claims to have seen a glowing silhouette of what appeared to be the late Billy Derbyton shunting a lot of trucks as if nothing happened. Other witnesses claim that Billy's whistle was heard blaring across the worksite, but these never really amounted to any evidence following investigation. Only significant evidence being the witness accounts of Bill, Ben, and a few others. But regardless, it is believed that every year around the anniversary of the accident, that you could see Billy Durberton's ghost just going around business as usual. Number 2. On a lighter note, every Halloween, a huge firework display is held at Ulfstead. Most of the engines often attend after finishing their work. Oftentimes, a bunch of ghost stories are shared amongst the engines, and for some, this is the biggest highlight of their year. Number 3. Across the waterways, at Big City Railroad, they have a tradition where on October 31st every year, the crew members end the day early so they can be with their families for the holiday. And of course, like many other places, a few ghost stories are passed around amongst the engines and staff alike. Notably one of Big City Railroad number 1, which I might go into another video in the distant future. So look out for that, I guess. Number 4. Mavis arrived at Farquhar Quarry in 1964, like in the Railway series, and became its main shunting engine. And she arrived in all black and remained in this livery until 1968. Mavis chose to have her side plates painted to a vibrant red, which she still sports to this very day. Number 5. During the Skarloey Railway's expansion in the late 60s, there were multiple reported sightings of ghosts of Smudger and Stanley in the valley where they last were before they died. And how these were reported amongst Skarloey Railway workers is because the Skarloey Railway had bought up most of their land as it just went into government hands, pretty much. It was a fairly complicated mess. Anyway, so the reportings of these ghosts were amongst mostly railway workers and, surprisingly, Duncan, who claimed to have seen the glowing outline of Smudger right in front of him. And this caused him to run away like a little bitch. Number 6. So you know when that boulder wreaked havoc on that soon-to-be quarry mine in 1970, right? Well, a few years later in 75, a filmmaker actually used the idea as inspiration for a movie which was filmed on Sodor. In the film, the boulder, which was named Jacko, actually came to life and terrorized a little branch line. And the film was called Jacko Night on the Railway, and it starred a Great Western Railway 1400 and the British Railways Class O2, which are essentially loose representations of both Thomas and Rusty. Number 7. Sodor Central Prison is located south of Kildane and was opened in 1902. There was no railway access to this prison, and whenever a sentient vehicle commits a crime, they are just towed there by lorry, and where they serve out their sentence. Number 8. Wild Express Studios is the premier film studio based on Sodor, and is located at Marin. It has brought masterpieces like the Jacko Night Trilogy to the big screens, and is absolute fan-favorite studio choice amongst moviegoers on Sodor. Number 9. Mighty Mo is a name given to Murdoch in this AU. He just goes by Mo most of the time, by the way, but he was built in 1958, and he walled about Sodor in 1969 after he was bought and auctioned by the Northwestern Railway. After arriving on Sodor, he was given the option to be repainted, and he chose his favorite color, orange. Orange is his favorite color as it is synonymous with his favorite part of Halloween, the jack-o'-lanterns. Murdoch loves jack-o'-lanterns. He even advocates for loads of them to be placed all around the engine sheds every year. Needless to say, Murdoch is a huge Halloween buff. Number 10. So you know how in episode 4 I said Top Hat was in 042, right? Well, I'd actually like to retcon that and make him a 260 Camelback. The reason I do this is because I just find it so wrong to have Top Hat, who's meant to be larger than characters like, say, 10 Cents and Little Owl and all that stuff, have them basically be even sizes. So I figured making him a little bit larger engine is a little more proportionate. Build year and all that's still pretty much the same, just wheel configuration is the only difference. Number 11. Sodor is huge on Halloween. It is considered their biggest holiday of the year, and the celebrations across the island involve parades, parties, movie screenings, fireworks shows, the list goes on. Even the Northwestern Railway engines even get to join on the fun. They even get the chance to wear some cool decorations to celebrate. Halloween is truly popular amongst Hudrians. Happy Halloween, everybody! Thank you all very much for watching, and I will see you all in the next video. Hold up. Wait a minute. Y'all thought I was finished? Oh, no, my friend. We are back with Porterverse Lore Ramblings. New title. Oh, yeah. Episode 6 is finally here. So without further ado, Let's get into it. Number 1. D261 was built in 1960 and mostly ran around the London Midland region throughout his working life, though he would occasionally pop up in the northwestern region on Sodor from time to time, much to the northwestern engine's disdain. In 1983, he was withdrawn from service and was due to be scrapped. The crew of D261, however, saw to prevent that, and eagerly contacted the NWR for a potential purchase deal. The deal worked, and Northwestern Railway purchased D261 for British Railways. And D261, named Ringner now, was quickly shipped over to Sodor, where it was repainted out of British Railways blue into Northwestern green. And Ringner is currently one of the Northwestern's freight engines as of 2023. Number 2. Sam was built in 1938 as an experimental prototype 4664 express freight engine for the Big City Railroad, and it broke a few records as the largest steam locomotive to ever work on the Big City Railroad. And Sam was painted into an all-new teal livery that became the railroad's express freight livery. Sam was one of the last steam locomotives to be in service on the railroad and was withdrawn in 1969. After this, Sam floated around a handful of owners throughout the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, until being placed in storage around 2004 following the expiration of his boiler ticket. In 2010, Sam was shockingly purchased by the Big City Railroad, who bought him back and restored him by 2014 for rail tours, similar to what Union Pacific's Big Boy does nowadays. And Sam still hauls his rail tours on a regular to this very day. Number 3. MSR number 3 and 4 never received name changes, and their names are always Falcon and Peter Sam respectively. I just found the whole idea of name change randomly just kind of weird, and how they went along with it willingly. A little bit strange, you know? So I made a little change, so yeah. Moving on. Number 4. The Northwestern Railway was pretty crazy for making engines in the 1930s and built a handful of experimental engines for this, but most of these couldn't keep up with the sheer incline of Gordon's Hill. But in 1936, an 010-4 tank engine emerged from the works. It was actually a successful engine. Northwestern Railway number 69 in Ttte became the official banker for Gordon's Hill and was stationed at Wellsworth. And he'll be joined by Bell in the 1960s, and they'll both be seen wearing the Northwestern Railway's banking indigo livery, as they call it, by the late 60s. And Ttte is still the banker for Gordon's Hill in present day. And yes, like many other characters in his Porterverse, I plan on making a model of this guy. So look out for that in the distant future. Number 5. So you might recall me saying that certain characters live on a part of Sodor, but that I'll get into in a later video. Well, I'll just say it now. Characters like Stanley, Connor Canlin, and Neil, among others, live on the Ulfstead Castle Railway. And this also includes NWR number 27 as well. And this railway will be getting its own video in the near future, so I'll be very brief on the history in this video. It was originally a site for a World's Fair that was in 1966, I'll also get into that in another video as well. But the land was bought up by Sir Robert Norby II in the early 70s and turned into a Preservation Railway and Medieval Museum by 1974. That's all I'm going to reveal for now on this railway, but so you can look out in the near future, the UCR is definitely not done for. Look out for that in the near future. Number 6. The locomotives of the Farquhar Core Company are Mavis, 16, and a Wheatley Y10 class named Gale. Gale's model is, if you see on my Twitter, is what I've been working on, is currently in the works, so we'll talk about her a little bit more when she's ready. As for 16, he would arrive in late 1968 as a part of the NWR BR split deal. Well, you can also count Thumper technically as an FQC engine, rolling stock vehicle thing. So yeah, it's kind of a whole Farquhar Core thing. It's pretty cool. Number 7. When Duck was sent off to Wellsworth in 1957, he briefly became a banking engine for Gordon's Hill as Antares was undergoing an overhaul. A 7F was originally brought on for this, but more power was needed. And to further improve his track day of effort, Duck's sandboxes were extended to go above his running board to hold more sand. And Duck will retain these mods after the whole Crosby barbershop crash in 1957. And he still wears these new sandboxes in present day. Thank you all very much for watching this episode of the Porterverse Lore Ramblings. And don't worry, Northwestern Predecessors episode 2 is in the works and should be ready soon. But I do have one more video coming out right after this, and then Northwestern Predecessors returns. So don't worry, I definitely didn't forget about it. So yeah. Thank you all very much for watching this episode, and I will see you all in the next one. We are back with more Porterverse Lore Ramblings. Oh yeah, this is episode 7. Here we go. Number 1. Stephen is actually not the original rocket locomotive that currently resides at York. The Stephen that we are familiar with is actually the engine that was from the 1920s Buster Keaton film Our Hospitality. After the film's release, it is unknown where this replica of Will went. But regardless, it managed to surface for long enough in the early 70s for Robert Norby to come along and purchase it for the Ulster Castle Railway. And Stephen was fully restored to work in order just in time for the railway's opening in 1974, where he still works today. Pretty cool. Number 2. Thomas the Tank Engine and Box Hill are actually really good friends. But how, you may ask, when Thomas never worked on the LBSER in the Porterverse? Allow me to explain. So, in 1912, the Nafford and Ulster Rail was greatly expanding and became the Nafford, Arlesborough, and Ulster Railway. And so the KNUR and the LBSER struck up a deal that saw an engine and a handful of rolling stock be brought over on a multi-year loan deal for construction. And Box Hill was the engine in question, and Box Hill remained on Sodor before returning to the mainland in around 1923 before grouping. And it was around this time they got to know Thomas and became good friends. And fast forward to around 1960, and a rail tour set to travel through Sodor, and it was confirmed that a Terrier class will be pulling this rail tour. And you can imagine Thomas getting excited, as he might see his good old friend Box Hill again after nearly 40 years. You can imagine his utter disappointment when Stepney, a completely different Terrier, showed up instead. And thus the events of Thomas and Stepney unfold for the most part as it does in the TV series. But Thomas would see Box Hill again at the big railway gala in York in 1991, after nearly 70 years. They did a lot of catching up after that, to say the least. Number 3. The Flying Scotsman will visit Sodor frequently while in preservation. And these visits really kicked up in frequency in the 2010s, and he most often visits the Ulster Castle Railway whenever he's on Sodor. But he always makes sure to catch up with his brother Gordon whenever he visits. And for those wondering, he remains in his Eleni or apple green livery with 2 tenders.
Because BR Green sucks.
Number 4. Mr. Jelly's chocolate factory resides on the Peel Gardner branch line, north of Cronk to be exact, and it lies at the bottom of a hill. And it first opened with the branch line in 1925. Percy will end up crashing into it in 1953 with his infamous chocolate crunch accident, and that will cause the factory to close for a good few years. But it would reopen in 1969 with an even bigger factory than before, which still sees regular rail traffic to this very day. Number 5. Rebecca was built in 1947 and was placed on the northwestern region of British Railways, where she often hauled commuter services. But in 1965, she collided with another commuter train caused by a points failure. And a few people sadly perished in this accident, including Rebecca's crew and Rebecca herself, sadly. A memorial plaque was placed at the collision site and is dedicated to her and those who perished that night. Number 6. Bo, yes, that Bo that Bachman is making out of nowhere, actually worked on the Big City Railroad for a decent bit, hence why he has buffers. And he's drawn around 1900 or so, and he actually managed to survive long enough to become a static display at the Ulster Castle Railway.
That's right.
Our good old friend Sir Robert Normanby managed to scoop up Bo for his Castle Railway, and Bo still resides at the castle to this very day. Number 7. Our Percy that we know and love came about in 1926. It was in this year that several of the mainland engines went on strike, as they demanded a new shunter be placed at Nafford Station for their coaches. Tom had the first acts accordingly, and he managed to get a copy of an old saddle tank engine from the Robert Heath Sons and Company, specifically the number 6 engine. He modified the blueprints designed to have a bunker on the back for longer journeys, and after a few months of built construction, Percy emerged from the works and became the Nafford pilot. In 1955, Duck took over this process, and Percy was promoted to the Ulster branch line with Thomas and Toby, where he still works today. Thank you all very much for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. We're back at it again with Porterverse Slow Ramblings. This is episode 8. For this episode, we're going to be focusing a little bit more on the narrow gauge railways deep in the subterranean hills of, Sodor. Anyway, so, without further ado, let's get into it. Number 1. Proteus was an 044 tank engine that worked on the Mid-Sodor Railway. He was based on Falcon's design, but was given a handful of modifications, most notably being the unified splashers and an extra set of trailing wheels, thus made him an 044T. Proteus worked on the MSR since it first opened, and he was sold off when the railway closed in 1941, and it was unknown where he was for the next few decades. In 1975, Proteus was surprisingly donated to the Scarloia Railway. It turns out that he spent the 50s, 60s, and half of the 70s in a private collection, and a collector had run out of space for Proteus, and Proteus arrived in a rather sorry state. He was all rusted up and had decaying paintwork. But thankfully, he was fully restored by 1977 by the Sodor Railway. Number 2. Rumblin' Bridge is actually named Silvercliff in the Porterverse. It's basically the same location as the TV series, but has a different name. Silvercliff is, in modern day, a tourist town that is best known for its silvery cliffsides that decorate the majority of the area, and the various ponds, geysers, and saunas that are also scattered all around. And the Tramway Railway Station of Silvercliff first opened in 1962, and it was formerly a mid-Sodor railway station as well. Silvercliff is where Freddy, Mighty Mac, Ivo Hugh, and Luke are stationed in present day. Number 3. Peter, Sam, and Falcon wore a variety of liveries during their work lives. By 1952, they were on the Scarlet Railway and wearing the railway's livery of red base coat with blue lining. When Duke was found and restored in 1970, Peter, Sam, and Falcon were repainted back into their mid-Sodor railway liveries to commemorate Duke's return to steam, and they still wear these liveries in present day. Number 4. Dennis is the shunter at Timoth Harbor. After being withdrawn from service in 1959, the Timoth Port Authority purchased him and put him to work as the harbor's dedicated shunter, where he still works to present day. Number 5. Wilbur's visit to Sodor in the 1990s proved that by the end of his stay, the Fed Controller knew that an engine like Wilbur was exactly what he needed, and so Sir Topham Hatt III acted accordingly and bought the one and only Warrington to become the new NAFR pilot. And Warrington was modified with a lambdom cab and a Giesel ejector. He was also repainted to Northwestern blue. Warrington remains as the NAFR's pilot in present day. Number 6. The name of the L1 tank that runs the Arsdale Tramway that I mentioned in the earlier episodes of the series is named Sigrid. She is named after a historic figure in Sudrian history. Sigrid was repainted to Northwestern brown, like Toby, after the tramway reopened in the 1970s. She only has the front and back cowcatchers, as side planes are required on this line. Sigrid is considered a rather kind and bubbly type according to other engines. She's good friends with a lot of them as well. It's pretty cool. Number 7. Juan and Terry's, the banker at Gordon's Hill, was withdrawn from service for an overhaul in 1957. Doug was temporarily brought over to Wellsworth to fill in. He wasn't the only engine to fill in then, as a 7F080 was relocated to the Northwestern region to help Doug with any banking trains that were traveling up Gordon's Hill. After Antares returned from overhaul, this 7F was relocated to the Kirkronan branch line. When the Northwestern Railway split from British Railways in 1968, this 7F was repainted to LMS Maroon, as he was of LMS descent, and was thus christened with the name Thorkel. Thorkel, like Sigrid, was also named after an iconic figure in Sudrian history. Thorkel still runs the Kirkronan branch on this very day, and is the sole surviving class of the 7F080 tender engine class. Thank you all very much for watching this episode of Porterverse Lore Ramblings, and I will see you all in the next one. Back by popular demand, it is Porterverse Lore Ramblings. I'm a man of my word and the man of the people. And if it's Porterverse Lore Ramblings you all want, then Porterverse Lore Ramblings you shall receive. Without further ado, let's dive into it. Number 1. After the whole debacle where Stebney accidentally stole the cricket team's ball and Caroline chased him in 1960, the cricket team actually got a pretty good laugh at the whole situation. So much so that they actually rebranded their team colors to match Stebney's livery. Stebney was pretty humbled by this and he found it pretty funny as well. And they still wore these color schemes to this very day. Number 2. Daisy is a British Railway Class 122 bubble car. She was first built in 1960 and was assigned to the Northwestern region after Thomas's debacle at the stationmaster's house at Farquhar. She first arrived in British Railways blue, one of the first of her kind to be painted as livery at the time, but in 1968 she was repainted into a special livery, Northwestern Emerald Jade. She is one of the very few engines on the railway to wear this livery, and she wears it with pride to this very day. Number 3. Lord Stinger? Yes, that Lord Stinger was a 282 tank engine built in 1921. He was built specifically to be the shunter at the big city garbage dump. Whenever a train was due out, he would usually double head with another big city engine. Despite the many efforts to keep him in service, Lord Stinger would sadly be withdrawn in 1960, and he will be scrapped the year later, after all the preservation attempts failed. Lord Stinger's nameplates are preserved today at the Big City Transfer Museum. Number 4. Henry's Forest is located between the stations of Kildane and Kelsthorpe Road. An event of the namesake episode will take place in 1974, and the forest was officially declared a nature reserve in 1975. Trevor often comes over to help with fruit harvesting from time to time. Number 5. Big City Port has 2 ocean liners that call it home, the Princess Alice and the Duchess. Both are built in Big City Port in 1925 and 1932 respectively. Princess Alice was the first one built, and was one of the earliest examples of an American-built ocean liner at sea. And Duchess would follow as a means of reviving Big City's economy and tourism industry after the Depression basically wrecked it completely. And these ships proved their worth and were very popular amongst passengers. Despite the popularity, sadly neither of these ships survive in present day. The Duchess was scrapped in 1964, after being withdrawn from service. The Princess Alice was almost saved actually, but the plan sadly fell through after the group intending to buy her had a scandal unfold, and thus the whole group disbanded. Princess Alice was scrapped in 1968. Their respective bells are preserved along with a handful of other artifacts from their interiors, and these are all on display at the Big City Transport Museum. Number 6. Wilfred, in present day, is an 062 tank engine. In present day to be exact. He did start work in life as an 042 tank engine like the rest of the Holy Found Mountain Railway engines. He was sent for a rebuild in 1990 and returned as a 062 tank engine. And he is now much stronger than before. He can now push longer trains to keep up with the increasing demand of tourism. He also returned in a yellow livery. What reason exactly? Well, the Cooleyfield's management found the color pretty attractive, and Wilfred didn't mind. He was pretty cool with it. He enjoyed the change of pace from the purple after decades of wearing it. And he still wears his yellow livery in present day. Number 7. The Knapford Harbor Board has 2 engines that are shown as at Knapford Harbor. These being number 1, Salty, and number 2, Porter. You're probably wondering, if Salt is at Knapford, then who shuns at Brandon Docks? Very simple, it's Bartholomew. We've actually discussed in an earlier video. Porterverse arrived to the railway in 1946. But he was transferred over to Brandon briefly in 1958. Salty would arrive at Knapford Harbor in 1960, and Porter would transfer back over to Knapford in 1967. Porter and Salty are mainly shunners at Knapford Harbor in present day, and are very good friends. They really like their work, it's really cool. Thank you all very much for watching this episode of Porterverse Ramblings, and I'll see you all in the next one.
And now, folks, it's time to say goodnight. We sincerely appreciate your patronage and hope we've succeeded in bringing you an enjoyable evening of entertainment. Please drive home carefully and come back again soon. Good night.